Welcome to the Prime Minister Parasha Midrash, where Mashiach ben Yosef from 5776 and 5777 gives Mikra and Midrash advice that the Prime Minister of Israel needs to know so that Joseph can come home. So, a big welcome to the rabbis who advised the Prime Minister of Israel from Mashiach ben Yosef for 5776 and 5777. And my counsel requests that I bring it in under an hour. And the only way I know how to do that is to explain less. We're concerned about it because what we want is genuine dialogue with Brother Judah. The only problem is that, as we have seen in the last few parashiot, Judah doesn't know the Tanakh. He thinks he knows it, but they have elite rabbis who haven't even read the whole Tanakh one time. So we need to explain at least a little bit here, but we only have 1 hour. So let's dive right in. Bereshit, or Genesis, chapter 47, verse 29. When the time drew near that Israel must die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, "Now, if I have found favor in your sight, please put your hand under my thigh and deal kindly and truly with me. Please do not bury me in Egypt," meaning, please do not bury me in the world, but let me lie with my fathers. You shall carry me out of Egypt, out of the world, and bury me in their burial place. And Joseph said, "I will do as you have said," because Joseph knows what it's like to be lost in Egypt. Chapter 48 and verse 1. Now it came to pass after these things that Joseph was told, "Indeed, your father is sick." And he took with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And now your 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, who were born to you in the land of Mitzrayim, or Egypt, before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. As Reuven and Shimon, they shall be mine. And we think that Israel said this to protect Ephraim and Manasseh. And now, just to get this out of the way, let's remember that Abraham came from Ur of the Kasdim, or Ur of the Chaldees. The majority opinion is that it was in Iraq. The alternate opinion is Turkey. Either way, you're talking Shem or maybe Japheth, but not Ham. Whereas in Egypt, you are talking Ham. So one way or another, you're talking a much lighter skinned Israelite people than Ham in Egypt. But now it's different. And last week in Parasha Midrash, in Bereshit, or Genesis 46 and verse 20, we saw that Manasseh and Ephraim have Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, the Egyptian pagan priest of On, as their mother. Now, what kind of a Nachmanides marker are we even going to drop here? What kind of Nachmanides cycle did Judah and Levi, and I guess you also blame Shimon, we'll get into that. What kind of Nachmanides cycle did you set in motion here? When you sold our forefather Joseph into slavery and he was given an Egyptian wife, did you create 2 new species of the same genus? Or what did you do? And if Ephraim and Manasseh are half Egyptian, we're talking not just darker skin, but curly hair. So aren't family reunions fun? Is Judah willing to take responsibility for what they have done? If they're concerned about Ephraim being different, can Judah understand why we are different? Does anyone in the house of Judah have a problem with great-great-great-grandma being Egyptian? I know some Ephraimites in Texas who have a big problem with grandma being black. But isn't that self-hatred, house of Ephraim? Then there's also Genesis 48 and verse 13. Joseph guided Ephraim with his right hand toward Israel, his father's left hand, because Ephraim was the younger, so he should get the left hand blessing, which some people think isn't that great because the left hand pushes away. And Joseph also guided Manasseh with his left hand toward Israel's right hand, because Manasseh was the older and the right hand draws near. But then in verse 14, Israel, being a prophet, famously crossed his hands. He stretched out his right hand and laid it on Ephraim's head, even though Ephraim was the younger. At the same time, he put his left hand on Manasseh's head, even though Manasseh was older, being the firstborn. So drop a Nachmanides pattern marker here, and we'll come back to it and unpack it in the Abrahamic Accords series. Now let's notice, because in verse 16, there's a special blessing over Ephraim and Manasseh. our father Israel prophesied that Ephraim and Manasseh would grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth, not just any multitude. If we look at the Hebrew, it tells us, and sorry if I mispronounce anything, Hidagu lerov b'kerev haaretz. And what it means is, let them teem like fishes in the midst of the earth. And what do we see in mainstream Christianity but a multitude of Christian fish symbols and fisherman motifs? But the reason they're still teeming in the earth rather than in the land of Israel is they're not yet aching to go back to the land of Israel. In other words, they're still on the far side of the Sambachan River, so to speak, for another two big wars and maybe two or three more generations. We'll talk about that in the Abraham Accords series. So in verse 18, it's like, Dad, what are you doing? And in verse 19, Dad's like, I know, my son, I get it. I know what I'm doing. You're a prophet, right? Okay, who do you think you got it from, son? Okay, now that we got that cleared up, the firstborn Manasseh also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. And we don't have the time to unpack this here, but we look at this in more detail in the Abraham Accords series. But if we look at the Gentile nations and also the Jewish, Catholic, and Protestant nations as prophetic bodies, prophetic entities in the earth, we get a different picture of what's being prophesied here. And there are several authors who deal with this, both Christian and Jewish. And there are many points of disagreement and discussion. But for example, there's an Orthodox Jewish researcher named Yair Davidi, and he wrote several books related to biblical and archaeology research into the migrations of the lost tribes. And there are also several Christian authors, including Raymond Capt. There's also Stephen Collins and others. I tend to the Jewish stuff because the commandment from Elohim, well, that was later, but the commandment was to make friends with brother Judah as much as that's possible when they're trying to curse us to death. But here's Yair Davidi's best of compilation called The Tribes. And in Hebrew, it's called Achim Aherim, or the other brothers. And just for full disclosure, Yair Davidi is 100% Orthodox. He's 100% against Yeshua for sure. And he basically catalogs the archaeological and historical evidence showing the migrations of the prophetic bodies of the tribes by various migration routes to what later became Protestant Northwestern Europe. And again, there's other work by Raymond Capt, Stephen Collins, and others. There's some by White. This is only one of many levels of what Yahweh's doing, so that as to reach every family, every nation, and every clan, every tribe and tongue and people all over the earth, all through the earth. However, we take issue with Davidi here. We disagree in that we believe the United States of America is the younger brother. And that's simply because England was the mother country, so to speak. So England and the UK is the older brother, Manasseh, who also is great, but America is the younger brother, Ephraim, who went on to become greater. And it's nothing to get prideful about because Elohim always chooses the least. So we'll try to unpack that in much more detail in the Abraham Accords series. But Israel prophesies, but truly his younger brother, we could think of the USA here, shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become, and the New King James Version reads, a multitude of nations. And some people tie that description to the 50 United States and also to its protectorates. But if we take that back to the Hebrew, the phrase here is Melo HaGoyim, and it refers to the fullness of the nations or to the completeness of the Gentile nations, which the United States of America is in a very real sense, also in a prophetic sense. We'll talk about that more in the Four Horses series. But here you have a country that's made up, well, the terms are not usually used clearly in Western parlance. So the terms country and nation are quite often mixed, but they mean different things. In the way Yahweh looks at things, your religion is your nation. Your religion is your nationality. So, and in the Abraham Accord series and then the Four Horses series, we'll take a look also, and we'll see that the United States of America is the prophetic last or least of the nations of Jeremiah or Yirmiyahu, chapter 50 and verse 12. We have a chapter on that in the back of the Revelation study, in the back of the also Revelation Simplified series. We hope to redo that completely in the Four Horses series, expand that greatly into the Abrahamic Accords. But America is perhaps the greatest of nations in one sense, and it's also the most degenerate of nations in another sense. And taken in context, the whole passage in Jeremiah basically prophesies the destruction, at least of the majority of the United States of America, and it will not be inhabited after that. And as we'll see in the Four Horses series, this coming destruction, basically World War IV, is what forces the remnant of Ephraim to come home. And this is also the real reason why Yahweh allows the rabbis to pray for the destruction of the United States of America, is to make Ephraim leave the prophetic land of Babylon and come back home to the land of Israel when it is time.
And therefore, Chazal tell us in the Gemara Megillah that the relationship between Rome and Klal Yisrael is that Kishazeh kam zeh noifel. That if somebody were to say Jerusalem is built and Caesarea is built, don't believe them. If anybody says they both lay in ruins, don't believe them. It's either one or the other. Either the Jewish people rule or the Romans rule. Because it's one melucha, it's one power. Never shall they both rule the world. Edom, Rome. Who is Rome today? Italy. The United States is considered the spiritual heir of Rome. Western culture is the spiritual heir of Edom of Rome.
As we will see in Chapter 2 of the documentary for the Prime Minister and the Israeli Knesset, the biggest problem here is that the Orthodox rabbis, the Talmudists, are willfully ignorant of the fact that the USA is a Protestant country, not legacy Catholic, it's legacy Protestant. And as legacy Protestant, it is therefore of Joseph, not Esau. And what's one of the things that's sad is that a lot of these USA hating and anti-USA rabbis that pray for the destruction of the United States of America even grew up in the United States and should know better. It's just basic U.S. history. The Pilgrims were Protestant religious refugees. And there's a good movie, but you'd have to rent it or buy it. It's called Dangerous Crossing. And it talks about why the Pilgrims, they even wanted to escape the Protestant Anglican Church, because in the Protestant Anglican Church, you couldn't read your Bible. So they saw this as an opportunity to begin reading the Bible for themselves. To them, it seemed like a good deal, even to risk their lives, settling in a new world with disease and starvation, no cities, potentially hostile neighbors. But they did it just to get away from the British crown state religion. Because why? Because the Pilgrims knew that the Protestant crowns of Europe are still ultimately connected to Rome. They're still ultimately extensions of Esau, and they also continue to practice the same Roman doctrines, like Sunday worship, like the Trinity, which we'll see in the Abrahamic Accords series, is an Esauite doctrine, which ultimately is indicative. It hails from Mystery Babylon. And what Judah needs to realize is that Joseph purposefully broke free of Esau's Talmud and Esau's yoke in the Protestant Reformation of 5278 or 1517 CE. And there were more than 200 years of hot wars. I count more than 300 years of hot wars that followed just for Joseph to get loose from Esau. And even today, it's not really over. But notice how the Orthodox rabbis call the Protestant Ephraimite USA an Esavite country.
Once Edom is destroyed, along with its false Messiah, then and only then can Israel rise, and Messiah ben David can gather the exiles and build the third temple. Erev Shabbat is the end of the 6th millennia, which we are currently in, and Edom must be destroyed, and the false Messiah must be completely exposed, and once that happens, then the real one actually comes, and then Jerusalem can be built properly. When this one falls, the other rises. Israel and Rome can never stand at the same time, which is why I told you, why did he hang on Friday Eve, Erev Shabbat? Because that is to show you that at the end of days, Christianity will be no more, And then finally, Israel will rise. Israel and Rome can never stand at the same time. They are opposites: Jacob, Israel, and Esav, Edom. And when the false Messiah falls, the other, the real Messiah, will rise. It is already known that Israel's greatest enemy is Edom. And God turned things around so that the Netzer Nitav, the despicable descendant, and the filth of wicked Esav, who is their God, would be buried in Israel, in Jerusalem. This is why Jesus was actually buried in Jerusalem. The reason for this is that even the enemies of God should pray for the city of God, which is Jerusalem, where their God, Jesus, was buried. Yes, I said buried, because this causes an evil angel to say amen against his will. You see, this is the fast one that God actually pulled on Satan, when all those who follow Satan think that they're pulling a fast one on God. They sing psalms for the restoration of Jerusalem and the gathering of Israel to Zion, and they have no idea that they are actually praying for the establishment of the holy in the world and the destruction of their very religion. So, thank you. We accept all your prayers. The Kalippah over here that is going to be destroyed, the Kalippah, as I said, even in my story, this is Jesus. This is the New Testament. This is the church and everything that comes with it or out of it and every variation from it.
As we'll see in the Abrahamic Accords in the Four Horses video series, the rabbis do have a certain prophetic point. They have one of two necessary handles. And that's because Protestantism per se does not truly come all the way back to the original apostolic faith. It doesn't come back to a Hebraic form of worship. Most Protestants still worship on Sunday, which is Asap's weekly day of worship. So how can Ephraim expect Judah to recognize him as Ephraim when he still obeys Asap's ways, or some of Asap's ways? How can we expect the identity thieves on the Noahide Kiruv channel to leave us alone and not try to steal our identities if we don't clean up and behave like Hebrews from Joseph and not as the sons of an Egyptian pagan priest's daughter, if you know what I'm saying? Genesis 48 and verse 21. Then Israel said to Joseph, behold, I am dying, but Elohim will be with you and bring you, meaning your children, back to the land of your fathers. How does that stack up with the Talmud? Verse 22, moreover, I have given to you one portion above your brothers. So is that what Judah is trying to prevent? Is the fulfillment of our forefather Israel's prophecy? Then in Genesis 49 and verse 1, it's also very important. Israel, our father, prophesies over all 12 tribes to say what shall befall them in the last days. And notice that we are in the last days. And Father Israel says there should be 12 or 13 tribes. There's 12 or 13 tribes listed in the Torah, the written Torah, are there not? And our Father Israel says that these prophecies are for now in these last days. Only if you are a Talmudist, if you're Orthodox Jewish, then you can't really let yourself believe it all the way. Maybe you could believe it 50%. Because if you're Talmudist, you have to live in a split level head. Because on the one hand, you know that these are the prophecies that come from Israel, our forefather. And he prophesied that in the end times, there would be 12 or 13 tribes. Then on the other hand, in your mezzanine split level Tamar in-law apartment, things have gone schizophrenic because the Talmudistan community rules require you to deny anything else other than only the southern house of Judah exists. Only Judah, Levi, and Benjamin still exist, right? And they're all classified under Judah. There's no more Joseph, right? So just kill Joseph. Oh, and now you get all his women and babies, right? All his adolescent males, pre-adolescent males. Oh, and you get his priestly role, and you get whatever else comes with his Ketona Pasim. It looks bad, brothers. But let's ask ourselves, how did Judah get the kingship role anyway? So in verse 3, Reuven was the firstborn, but sadly he disqualified himself through sexual immorality. That's bad. Don't do that. And if Judah doesn't think that the Tamar cycle costs him, then he's got another think coming. So now let's talk about cruelty. Verse 5. Shimon and Levi, have a yetzer hara, or an evil fleshly inclination that is cruel. Instruments of cruelty are in their dwelling place. Now drop your Nachmanides marker there, because we're going to see this again. Let my soul not enter into their council when they're being like that. Let my honor not be united to their assembly. For in their anger they slew a man, and not just a man, but a whole village. And in their self-will they hamstrung an ox. Okay, well, what ox? The ox, or the reim, or the aurochs ox, is an ancient symbol for Joseph. And the reim, or the aurochs ox, was an ancient big ox. The male stood about 1.8 meters, or about 5'10" at the shoulder. So instead of looking down on a cow, you'd look at the shoulder and then you'd look up to see the head and horns. But since Levi is cruel and the rabbis allegedly descend from the Levitical order, then is that what the rabbis are is that why the rabbis are cruel to Joseph? Is because of this verse? Do we need to drop a Nachmanides cruelty marker here over Levi? Is this why the Orthodox rabbis seek to destroy all of Joseph's men so they can have their way with Joseph's women and children and babies? Or how do you explain it, brothers? Why else is the Levitical Talmud so cruel to Joseph perpetually, if this is not a manifestation of this Nachmanides pattern? Talmud tractate Sanhedrin 58b, or the backside of page 58, tells us that Joseph may not have any Shabbat. None. Talmud tractate Bergen-Belsen reads, and Resh Lakish says, a Gentile, because there's no Joseph, only Judah in Talmud. There's Judah and Gentiles, that's it. So Resh Lakish says, a Gentile who observed Shabbat is liable to receive the death penalty. Okay, that's talking all of Ephraim, all of Joseph, all of Manasseh. As it is stated, and day and night shall not cease, referring to Genesis 8 and verse 23, which literally means, they say, the rabbis say it literally means, and day and night Joseph shall not rest. Woohoo! Work Joseph to death. Kill the prophets. It says, the rabbis choose to interpret this homiletically, meaning figuratively, rather than literally. They interpret this homiletically, or figuratively, to mean that the Josephite descendants of Noah may not ever take a day of rest. Meaning, what the Levite rabbis are dreaming of here is literally working Joseph to death. And they want us to praise them while they're working us to death. Be a good little Josephite slave and know that this is not cruelty. This is the word of Elohim. This has come straight from the Talmud.
I just want to say this to our Christian friends, you know, just to call it as it is and say it straight out, you know, you guys are worshiping one Jew. That's a mistake. You should be worshiping every single one of us, because we all die for your sins every single day. And that's exactly what's going on here. Yeah. We're all God's firstborn, and we're dying for your sins right now because the Jewish people in the land of Israel are the bulwark against the orcs. Okay? The orcs are coming not to a theater near you, but to your home.
So you want us to worship you while you work us to death with no Shabbat ever. Rabbi Rickman, did you get that from reading the Torah portion from the Tanakh, or did you get that from reading the Talmud? And if you got that from reading the Talmud, which most certainly you did, because that kind of thing is not in the Tanakh of Elohim, have you ever thought about reading the Tanakh of Elohim instead of your made-up Son of Tamar book? Let's look at what you read. Sanhedrin 58b, and the master said, it's in Sanhedrin 57a, the front side of the last page, that Their prohibition, the B'nai Noach prohibition, is their death penalty. In other words, if Joseph doesn't want to throw his Tanakh in the trash and convert to the worship of the Talmud instead, and follow Judah's B'nai Noach slavery program, working 7 days a week, the penalty is execution. Isn't that what it says, Rabbi Rickman? So what are we saying here? If Joseph, with respect, if Joseph wants to obey the Tanakh, if Joseph wants to obey Elohim and take a Sabbath, the ever so humble rabbis who say they die daily for us, who in reality are praying for our deaths 3 times each day, joke, so they can have our women and children and do all kinds of disgusting things to them. This whole thing it's the kind of thing Joseph wishes was a bad joke, but it's not. Because this is really the cruelty that the Levites want for Joseph. Let's continue. Ravina says, if a Josephite Gentile descendant of Noach observes, because there's only Judah and Gentiles, that's it. If a descendant of Noach, Joseph, observes any day of rest on any day of the week, meaning especially Shabbat for Joseph, but also Sunday for Esav or Friday for Ishmael, even if they do not normally set aside that day as a day for religious worship, for example, on a Monday, nonetheless, he is liable to die. In other words, no religious day of rest for Joseph. The only way Joseph can have a day of rest is if you deny the Tanakh and convert to the worship of the Talmud. Deny your inheritance, deny all the prophecies over you, deny the Ketonot Basim, deny Parasha Vayechi. And we have to adopt Judah and Levi's plans in Isaiah 30 and verse 1. You have Talmud tractate Auschwitz. The plan is simply to work Joseph to death and then take Joseph's women and children and do whatever you feel like doing. And this has been the great Talmudic dream for how long, Rabbi Rickman? For at least 1,800 years and probably even longer, given the cycles theory. And the Birchat HaMinim, the death curse over Joseph, has been around for almost 2,000 years, coming right up on the 2,000-year marker. I don't know how to say this except just to say it. And, the wounds of a friend, brothers. But for each and every action, you get an equal but opposite reaction. Ken, everyone knows that, right? Okay, so Levi's cruel, and Judah curses, including Levi, curses Joseph 3 times a day for almost 2,000 years. And then you're surprised at what happens. You're surprised at the Holocaust. It's one of the worst tragedies ever to befall mankind. But can you see what you've opened the door to by continually putting out curse? I don't want to use pagan terms, but you continue putting out curse energy. You're putting out curses and curses and curses over Joseph. Do you read Genesis 12 and verse 3 or only in passing? Or does it only apply to Judah and not Joseph? You curse Joseph for almost 2,000 years, and then you're surprised when Elohim sends something negative back? Hello? Knock, knock. Forgive me. The point is not to offend. The point is to speak truth one brother to another brother. Sons of 4 mothers. How do you know that the Birchat HaMinim vis-a-vis Genesis 12 and verse 3 is not what caused your Holocaust? How do you know you didn't bring that on yourselves? How do you know that immortalizing and deifying the exact same spirit that got you sent into the Roman exile in the first place is not what caused the Holocaust? Forgive me, I understand it's one of the most sensitive topics ever, but instead of Yad Vashem, wouldn't it be more honest to call it Yad HaSpiritual Boomerang Effect of Talmud Tractate Berachot 28b through 29a, cursing Joseph 3 times every weekday, 18 times a week, 936 times a year for almost 2,000 years. Okay, it doesn't roll off the tongue quite as well, but it would be more accurate than Yad Vashem. And maybe someone in Levi might learn something finally about breaking Genesis 12 and verse 3. You know, according to the Kol HaTorah prophecy, the Rabbi Rivlin, the rabbis have known who Joseph is for at least 200 years, probably much longer because prophecies tend to get recycled and developed and this kind of a thing. But they apparently believe this enough to hijack my PC and my life. And you can't understand that Elohim doesn't like it when you break Genesis 12 and verse 3. That only is for the benefit of the Judah, nothing for Joseph. Well, Rabbi Breitowitz lets us know that the Ramban writes that Christianity was a useful transition to take people away from paganism and toward a monotheistic belief in Elohim. So, according to the Ramban, even though Orthodox Judaism considers Christianity to be false and perverted, at least Christianity took people out of the paganism row.
You know, the Rambam even writes that Christianity, this is a censored passage, Christianity was a useful transition to take people away from paganism towards a monotheistic belief in God. Even though Christianity was false and perverted and everything else, but it took people out of the paganism role.
You know, so the rabbis know we're transitioning. They know Joseph is in transition, and the rabbis know it takes 3 or 4 generations to change DNA in a permanent way. But still, you want to kill or enslave us, right? You can see we're in transition. Joseph only wants good things for Judah, but you expect to plant hatred and reap love? What do you guys think? You're surprised by the boomerang effect? You've never heard what goes around comes around eventually? Eventually, what you put out, it comes back around to hit you in the back of the head. You never heard as you sow or plant, so shall you reap or harvest? You've never heard of chickens coming home to roost? So the rabbis know Joseph is transitioning. And the rabbis know it takes 3 or 4 generations to change DNA. But still, the rabbis want to kill us or enslave us or convert us. And that's it, right? So Judah tells Joseph, remember Genesis 12 and verse 3, and Joseph wants good things for Judah. We are not Esau. You guys need to get that through your heads. Okay? But what do you guys think? Do you expect to plant hatred and gaslight the whole world and then reap love as a result of sowing hatred and pedophilia? And you're surprised by the boomerang effect, it seems. I mean, I don't know what sayings you have in Judah, but have you ever heard what goes around, eventually it comes back around? You've never heard as you sow or as you plant, so shall you reap or harvest. You've never, you think you can sow hatred and reap love? How does that work? You've never heard of chickens coming home to roost? I mean, what sayings do you have in Judah to this effect? In 2 Samuel 22 and verse 26, it says, with the merciful, Elohim will show himself merciful. And with the blameless, he will show himself blameless. Verse 27, with the pure, Elohim will show himself pure. But with the devious, Elohim shows himself to be shrewd. Oh, why? Why does bad stuff happen to us? Okay, can you guys wake up and learn? Now, for Joseph, the Art Scroll Stone Edition Tanakh series is very instructive. And it's also what they use in all the American yeshivot. So when you're reading Art Scroll Tanakh, you're reading the same book they use in the Jewish yeshivot in the USA. And they have a 2-volume expanded Genesis that anthologizes all the commentary in all the appropriate places, meaning they append the notes from the Talmud tractates wherever they apply in the text, and then they sell it to the public. Of course, it's a light-duty version. There's a lot more if you dive straight in there to the Talmud itself. But Joseph finds such anthologies to be very helpful in understanding the mindset of a brother who prays for his death 936 times each year, and a brother who pretends to follow the Tanakh, but as we'll see, secretly he's practicing the mystery Babylonian arts of sex magic, pedophilia, incest, and cruel fratricide. It's blood sugar sex magic dressed up to mimic scripture. It's Babylonian sex magic in disguise, dressed up to look like scripture. We'll see that in the Abrahamic Accords series because we want to reconcile with you, so we need to talk about the real problems. And in the Art Scroll anthology, we find this big long drash that reads like a Sherlock Holmes whodunit. And you can find it on Safari also, but in the Art Scroll, it's all in one place. And amazingly, I was surprised to see this. The rabbis pin the blame on Shimon and Levi for Joseph's sale, even though the rabbinical order descends from Levi. So that was encouraging. That was encouraging to see Levi confess his sins one to another, that we might pray that Levi could be healed of this Yetzer Hara of cruelty. It says, although the Torah does not specifically mention that Shimon and Levi instigated the plot against Joseph, it's clear that the passage in Genesis 37 and verse 19, and they said, man to his brother, so now let us kill him, can only refer to Shimon and Levi. And that is not proven. It says it could not refer to Reuven or Yehudah, since they were opposed to slaying Joseph. Okay, now, hold up. Hold up a second. That is not proven. Okay, and you don't need to be autistic to spot that assumption. Alrighty, now we agree that Reuven would be unlikely to kill Joseph because Reuven was friendly. Reuven, we read in the text, he tried to get us out of it. However, from what we read, forgive us for saying so, but Judah was only opposed because there was more money in selling us. Or why do we still have the Birchat Haminim every day? Why, Mr. Prime Minister and the Israeli Knesset, why do you consent to let your people curse Joseph 3 times each weekday, asking Elohim for our deaths, even though you have known who we are for at least the past 200 years? And probably going all the way back to King Rehoboam. Why? You know who we are. Why are we under the death curse? Why are you placing Joseph under the ban? All right, well, let's check the references. Let's verify everything. Okay? It's an okay summation, not great. Genesis 37 and verse 19, then they said to one another, look, this dreaming prophet Joseph is coming. And you know how we hate prophets. Come, therefore, now let us kill him and cast him into some pit. Oh, and we'll be Hollywood scriptwriters and say, poor Joseph. Oh, boo-hoo. Some wild beast has devoured him. Okay, well, now there's no more Joseph and no more tribes because everything today is either you belong to the house of Judah, including Levi, or you're a goy, right? Oh, then we shall see what will become of the prophetic dreams that Elohim gave to Joseph, that Elohim would use Joseph to save our lives. Oh, that evil Joseph trying to save our lives. We should kill him. Yeah, and then we can take his women and children. Or, with all due respect, how does Rabbi Chaim Rickman explain the Birchat Haminim? How does the Prime Minister of Israel and the Israeli Knesset, how do they explain the Birchat Haminim? Okay, coming back to the written Torah in Genesis 49 and verse 6, Israel says, let my soul not enter into their counsel when they're like that. let my honor not be united to that kind of assembly, like they're proposing in Noahide Keruvistan. For in their anger they slew a man, indeed they slew a whole village, and in their self-will, meaning their rebellion against the spirit of Elohim, they hamstrung an ox. And Joseph is thinking, an ox? You don't mean Joseph, do you, by ox? Yes, Dad does, because Joseph's symbol was the re'im. It's a giant aurochs ox that stood about 1.8 meters tall, or about 5'10" at the shoulder. Again, most men's eyeballs, you'd be staring the ox right in the shoulder, and then you look up to see the head and the horns, right? Okay, we check the Art Scroll Anthology, and we find, yes, the Art Scroll Anthology for Genesis 49 and verse 7 reads, and at their whim they maimed an ox. In other words, they sought to disable Joseph, who is figuratively likened to an ox in Deuteronomy chapter 33 and verse 17. Which means that the hamstringing gets blamed on Shimon and Levi, right? Meaning it was the rabbi's idea. Same as the Talmud, because Levi is cruel. So do we need to drop another Nachmanides marker here and look for cruelty in all of the rabbinic writings? Now, Joseph was fourth in the line of succession. So Reuven, Shimon, and Levi had all disqualified themselves. Sexual immorality, violence, cruelty, those are all disqualifiers for the kingship tribe. Maybe Judah could take some notes. Okay, well, now the other three have disqualified themselves. Now it's Judah's turn. Genesis 49 and verse 8. Yehudah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. And Joseph will be very happy to praise a righteous, proper kingship that leads the people back to the Tanakh. We will gladly praise a new King Josiah, but we're not praising anyone when they have pedophilia plans for our women and children. When they curse us to death 3 times a day, you can forget about it. And it says, your hand shall be on the necks of your enemies. And Judah right now has his hand on Joseph's neck. That's what the Birkat Haminim is all about. It says, your father's children shall bow down before you. And again, Joseph looks forward to bowing down to a righteous king like King Josiah, who forces the Levites to go back to Elohim's words in the Tanakh and not make up their own rulings and traditions like they have in the Talmud. Verse 10, the scepter, meaning the kingship, shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver, come back to that, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh comes. And everyone agrees Shiloh means Mashiach. And to him, meaning Mashiach, Shiloh, shall be the obedience of the people. And that's good. And everyone but the rabbis believes that the Messiah is Jewish, right? Okay, so what about the portion of the lawgiver? What about that? The Hebrew is mechokek, which has a root of Strong's Hebrew 27 and verse 10. It's hakak, or hakak. It's a primitive root, meaning to hack or to engrave. For example, in Judges 5 and verse 14, the hacking refers to what a scribe does. By implication, you're talking about enacting laws which were hacked or cut into stone or metal or sometimes pressed into clay tablets in primitive times. And the idea here is that you have a prophet who hears what Elohim says and then receives a ruling from Elohim and then hacks that ruling into stone. Okay, but they don't write whatever they think. They're supposed to write only what they hear. That's what the rabbis are getting wrong. They're supposed to listen to Elohim and his words and then write his words down, lost concept, rather than making up a whole bunch of books through intellectual means. And at the end of the Parasha cycle, when we get to Parasha V'zot HaBeracha, we will see that the portion of the lawgiver was hidden in the tribe of Gad at the same time when Shiloh or Mashiach came. It's Devarim or Deuteronomy chapter 33 and verse 21. And Gad provided the first part for himself because the portion of the lawgiver was reserved or hidden there. And this took place when Shiloh came at the end of the second temple period, just like Daniel chapter 9, verses 25 and 26 say, because there's only one man who can fulfill Daniel chapter 9 and verse 25 and verse 26, because in verse 26, Mashiach had to be cut off, but not for himself, before the second temple was destroyed. No point in looking for anyone else. It's a past event. And when we look this word up, the lawgiver, it's the same as the one we just saw. It's Strong's Hebrew number 2710, mechokek. So now, how does this work, brothers? In the Orthodox Jewish version of events, okay, now, you don't read the Tanakh, you don't read the prophecies, you don't try to piece things together, you don't think about what it says, at least not in the mainstream. But so here you have Judah's waiting for a Jewish Shiloh, Messiah figure, right? That's right, because Mashiach does come from Judah. Amen. Except maybe in the Orthodox Jewish version where Mashiach comes from Yosef, right? Okay, well, in any case, here you have, in the Orthodox Jewish version, you have Judah handing both the scepter and the portion of the lawgiver to Judah, right? Because you have Judah hands the as the scepter and the portion of the lawgiver to the Jewish Shiloh, yes? Okay, except if Judah hands the portion of the lawgiver to Judah, then when is the portion of the lawgiver ever hidden in the tribe of Gad? Okay, so if Orthodox Judah's way is correct, which it isn't, this can never occur, right? Because if Judah gives it to Judah, when is it ever hidden in Gad? Well, as we might expect, the Talmud says something completely off topic. So we go to the Art Scroll Stone Edition Chumash, the Pentateuch, and it says, the lawgivers, in other words, Moses' burial plot, is hidden in Gad's tribal allotment. Huh? It says, Gad chose that area east of the Jordan River because Gad knew, he secretly knew, that Moshe would be interred there in a hidden grave, referring to Moshe's death in Deuteronomy 34 and verse 6. And this is from Rashi. And Joseph is like, what? What does that have to do with the Torah? What does that have to do with anything? Rashi says Gad chose east of the Jordan because somehow Gad prophetically knew that Moshe would be buried there. Okay, where does it say that? Where do you guys get this stuff? You got a bunch of out-of-work Hollywood screenwriters, do you? Okay, in the written Torah that comes from Elohim, in Bamidbar, or Numbers 32 and verse 1, the children of Reuven and the children of Gad had a very great multitude of livestock. When they saw the land of Yazer and the land of Gilead, that indeed the region was a place for livestock, they liked it. Then in verse 4, Gad said, if we have found favor in your sight, please let this land be given to your servants as a possession. Please let us stay on this side of the Jordan, for this is a Texas-like land for livestock, and your servants are cowboys from our youth. Right? Does the Tanakh say anything at all about Gad knowing that Moshe would be buried there? Did Reuven know? Is that why Reuven chose it? No, Reuven chose it because they had a multitude of livestock. It's a perfect example of the rabbis just making stuff up, just whatever seems to fit their narrative at the time. And if it survives 3 or 4 generations later, now it's considered, don't touch it. So the thing to note, though, is that in the rest of the chapter, you have end time prophecies over the other tribes that the Talmud says do not exist. You have end time prophecies over Issachar, Zebulun, Dan, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Joseph, and Benjamin. Okay, and these are end time prophecies. But the Talmud only allows Judah, Levi, and Benjamin. That's it. Only the southern house, even though you know it's not true, which makes the rabbis and the prime minister liars. And I wish we had time for the half-trip prophetic portion, but everyone says 1 hour or less. So we could do another hour easily on the Torah portion alone, but we'll leave some for next year. And next week, we'll begin to see how Elohim took 12 or 13 separate tribes and forged them into one single nation in the iron furnace. As always, please pray in earnest for kings, presidents, prime ministers, rabbis, and all those who are in authority. Please keep praying for Yahweh to raise up a King Josiah figure to turn the tribe of Levi back to Elohim's words in the Tanakh. And please pray that the rabbis will wake up and realize that the Talmud is not the word of Elohim, and that it is the Talmud that is stopping Joseph from coming home, according to the words of Elohim in the Tanakh. I hope to see you again next week for Parasha Shemot or Exodus. Please always remember to listen carefully for Elohim's voice and to do everything that it says, including all of his written commandments, at least the ones that we can. And please pray for a heart of flesh for Brother Levi. Shabbat Shalom.